Support for this podcast comes from Is Business Broken, a podcast from BU Questrom School of Business. Stick around until the end of this podcast for a preview of a recent episode about how to fairly compensate workers.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. A while back, I heard from a friend about a new bookstore co-founded by former Boston Poet Laureate Porsha Olayiwola. It's called JustBook-Ish. So we decided to head down to Dorchester, Fields Corner to be exact, to check it out. Of course, it's a spot where you can purchase a good novel or a book of poetry, but there's a lot more going on here. It's the kind of place where you're welcome to just chill. And we met up with Porsha to learn more about that.
Our goal when we opened the space was to really have books that reflected community members and also folks who were historically marginalized in the context of publishing and book spaces.
Yep. We got some banned books in here.
Yeah. We actually started with a banned book display. And that was up for quite a bit. I mean, if you have the chance to check out our bathroom, we actually call it the banned book bathroom because all of the writing, all of the authors, all of the books on the walls are in fact, or were in fact at some point banned.
Yeah, very cool bathroom, by the way, I must say. I also have the free bookshelf here.
Yeah, so part of the work is the work of a nonprofit. We want to create not just a bookstore, but a literary gathering space, right? And so if that means that folks need to come in and purchase a book, or if they just need to grab a book where they can sit down and read, we've got these free books here. And they're not like old books or used books.
The space invites you to come in, grab a book, and hang. You can get a bite or a non-alcoholic beverage, for now, at the bar, take a seat at the communal table, or relax in one of the window reading nooks. Porsha and her co-founder, Bing Broderick, want JustBook-Ish to be a third place, a neutral space away from home that's not work or school, where one can relax and just be. It's a place that helps strengthen the community. I asked Porsha about the importance of third places in her own life.
You grew up in Southside Chicago. Was there a third place for you that you try to bring into this space here?
I was actually having a talk with somebody recently who lives in the neighborhood, and it's like, I'm so glad this exists, right? And I was telling them that I was either driving past here or on my way home, and I was realizing that I didn't have a third space growing up, or rather the third spaces that I always ended up going to were far away from my house. I hung out at bookstores and I hung out at the library, and more specifically downtown library in Chicago. It would take me an hour to get there because of public transportation, but it was far away from my house, right? And then the other place, me and my friend after school always went to this other bookstore, and it was in a more affluent Black neighborhood on the South Side, but still far away from my house. And I just realized there wasn't like a coffee shop or a bookstore or anything that I could just go to and sit. It was very far away, always. So, somebody said something similar, like, I'm glad I can walk here. You know what I mean? And I reflected on that moment.
Yeah.
Full circle. Even though, Boston is a new home for me.
Yeah. This bookstore, you are covering ground at a moment that feels very tense for that type of work, right? We're under the Trump administration, and they are very hostile towards certain histories, learning certain ideas, especially as it relates to queerness. Are you worried at all that this bookstore may be targeted in some way, either by officials or by bad actors out in the world,
I mostly worry when we have an author in store and worry that they may target that author for their expression of self or et cetera. My worries are minuscule. I don't know. I'm like concerned, but also unbothered by everything because I have to be. And I think that we can't afford fear in this space. I did a reading last night in Cambridge, and there's a person who's like always at this bookstore who was at that reading. And I was like, do you live in Dorchester? Because it was in Cambridge, right? And they're like, no, I live in Somerville. I'm like, wow, you are always in our bookstore. And that person said, oh, it's just a safe space. As a queer person, this is like one of the only places I can go and feel good.
Wow.
And so I don't think we can really afford to have that kind of fear. I don't think we can afford to not like open our doors in a way that feels welcoming to folks.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to take that. We cannot afford to have fear. And you work a lot with young people, right? Talk to us about that and how you are using this as a space for young people.
We have been trying out something called the Lyric Lounge, where we have two folks from Boston, but college-age students, so relatively young, leading youth mics.
It's like an open mic for young people?
Yeah, we haven't figured out exactly what works the best for them. Seems like they want something a little on the edge of more adulty. But when folks come, it really is a beautiful gathering. You know what I mean? The things that they're talking about, the ways in which they just want to be. And then another thing I've been really excited about is something that's called A Book in Every Hand, in which, similar to this free book section, but we basically, if folks come in, a lot of young people, if they are like just staring at books and not necessarily buying them, I might rush over to them and give them a gift card, right? And say, get what you want, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or if a young person gets on the mic, they always get a gift card. We want you to know the store is yours. We want you to look around and shop around and say, wow, I'm really excited about this. And then we want you to go and take that gift card and pay for it, right?
Like, how do you see the business like maintaining itself, I guess any business at this time in this city is probably a big challenge. What's your long-term plan to stick around?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we were thinking about since the onset. I think part of the goal is to make this place irresistible by way of gathering, by way of the books and the curation, by way of the vibes, if you will, and so that it becomes a space that cannot be lost, you know what I mean? That folks are just as invested as we are, as the folks who work here. The community is just as invested. And so if there ever is a hard time, right, knock on wood, I feel as though the community will also take ownership and understand that if this is the staple in the community, that they also have a responsibility to keep us open and et cetera and flowing. But I think the books in and of themselves are selling. We've got this really great grant from the city in the context of our lease, to have subsidized rent. The lease is signed for 7 years, but at the end of it, I mean, Bing and I talked a lot about what it means to buy this space, right? And so we're thinking about sustainability in a lot of different ways. We're also thinking about, at some point, owning like a mobile truck, like a food truck, but a book truck that also has a stage. And so we might make our way and our route out around Dorchester to kind of also reach folks in that way. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there are things that we're thinking about, and I think especially as the nonprofit arm, is, things we think about are like, how do we be sustainable outside of philanthropy? And I'm not sure that we've answered that, but we do have ideas.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, we're going to talk about what brought Porsha to Boston. We'll be right back.
Support for this podcast comes from Is Business Broken, a podcast from BU Questrom School of Business, which asks in a recent episode, how do we build trust in employee pay?
Employees really want to know is the process by which they are paid fair.
Follow Is Business Broken wherever you get your podcasts, and stick around until the end of this podcast for a preview of the episode.
And we're back at JustBook-Ish in Dorchester with co-founder and poet Porsha Olayiwola.
This is your 15th year in Boston, because you came in 2010?
Yeah, it is. It'll be 15 years in July.
I read a piece where you say you came for the history.
I did. I'm a nerd.
Yeah. What kind of history have you learned so far?
I think the thing I found most fascinating and interesting and groundbreaking is really the humans, the like people who are actually from Boston, and the passion that they have about their city, I think is unparalleled. Like I will never be from Boston. Yeah, exactly. I will never be from Boston. I'm like, I feel I have pride in saying that because the folks who are from here have had this other kind of like thing in their blood that I find so fascinating. And then obviously, you know, I really care and think a lot about Africana studies. And so the vastness of Black history that I've found rooted here by way of other people who have come here and passed through, or the folks who have just been here, like the Haydens, for example. I think a lot about the Haydens.
Who are the Haydens?
Well, I think it's Lewis and Harriet Hayden, but they were folks who led these freedom riots when folks were escaping from slavery. They would essentially host their house as a part of the Underground Railroad. But they would keep gunpowder under their porch in case slave catchers tried to catch up. And I just think, I'm like, that's the kind of, you know, badass history that I'm landing into. So
yeah. And then your love for the city itself. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, Boston loved me. They wrapped their arms around me in a really great way. And so naturally, I love them back. I think it's also just a smaller city. So it's really an interesting place where if I leave my house for 2 seconds, somebody's going to be like, hey, Porsha. You know what I mean?
I guess I'm thinking of JustBook-Ish, like thinking of like the way you talk about Boston. There's something here where you're communicating with the city.
I hope so. Yeah. I like to think that a lot of my life is dedicated to service, but yeah, it's not. It's definitely a gift. It's no longer ours. You know what I mean? We're here and we like show up, but it definitely belongs to other folks, and I hope people can feel that and know that.
As our visit came to an end, Karan Freeman, the first patron of the day, walked in. It was his first time in the store. Karan has lived in Boston his whole life, and he told us he was excited to see a spot like JustBook-Ish come to Fields Corner.
I think that this is a beautiful thing for the community. The community needs more spaces like this, you know. Having third spaces like this where it's comfortable for these kids to come, adults, anybody of any age, to really just come here and flourish and feel like they have a safe space in the community where they can gain their knowledge, be respected, catch a good meal and everything is beautiful. I love it. You know, somewhere where you can educate yourself and see people who look like you in your community really doing something positive. So, you know, it definitely gives us all hope.
And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common, which is produced by myself and Franny Monahan. It's mixed by Marquise Neal with help this week from Paul Vaitkes. It's edited by Yasmin Ammer, and our theme music is me from Hisu. And from the newsroom of WBUR, I'm your host, Daryl C. Murphy. I'll talk to you next week.
Support for this podcast comes from Is Business Broken, a podcast from BU Questrom School of Business. A recent episode asks, how do employees feel about executive compensation? And how can companies balance rewarding top leaders while keeping employees engaged and valued?
I think if you see long-term success of a company and very attractive awards for executives and others aren't being brought along on that journey, that to me is a real concern, because I think we should live in an economy where you can make as much money as you want and work as hard as you want. But at the same time, there should be a path for others to also benefit. And if I were going to change the overall structure of compensation in American companies, I would look for a way to get more ownership in the hands of all employees. And right now, a lot of investors don't like the dilution of giving too many shares to employees, and some of the accounting rules make that a little difficult from the profit and loss statements. But finding a way to make everyone in the company an owner, while in addition to paying them fairly, but use sort of the Lincoln Electric model where they have a very strong profit sharing. People can make $100,000 a year on profit sharing, but you can do that also through equity. You've seen what's happened to the stock market over the last decade. Executives benefit, employees don't.
Find the full episode by searching for Is Business Broken wherever you get your podcasts, and learn more about the Mehrotra Institute for Business, Markets, and Society at ibms.bu.edu.